Have you ever noticed that, no matter how much you want a relationship to work, do you always end up falling into the same pattern? Perhaps you give too much of yourself. Perhaps you choose people who never reciprocate in the same measure. Or perhaps, when someone truly gets close, you feel like you want to walk away. And the most confusing thing is this: you want to love, but something always goes wrong. Today, we're going to talk about that. Regarding the invisible emotional patterns that sabotage our relationships, even when the intentions are good. Let's talk about anxious attachment. Regarding emotional insecurity, and about why so many relationships start out intense and they end painfully. But, most importantly, I want to show you something very important: how to create emotional security within yourself, without having to become cold, distant, or indifferent. Because detachment doesn't mean ceasing to feel. It's not about stopping loving. It's not about shutting yourself off from the world. True detachment is emotional freedom. It's about loving without fear. It's about connecting without losing yourself. And if you feel that you are experiencing intense, tiring, or unstable relationships, this video is for you. Most of our loving behaviors, it doesn't start with the first relationship. They start much earlier than that. They begin in childhood, when we learn, without realizing it, what is love, and what do we need to do to avoid losing this love. If you grew up trying to please others in order to be accepted, if you needed to adapt, mold yourself, or try too hard to receive attention, it's possible he learned a silent lesson: the idea that love needs to be earned. And that's how anxious attachment is born. A constant fear of being rejected, an almost urgent need for signs of love, an enormous difficulty in feeling at peace when the other person distances themselves, delays their arrival, or changes. Gradually, you begin to measure your worth based on the other person's reaction. If he responds, you feel good. If he shows interest, you feel safe. But when he walks away, it's as if the ground disappears. And then comes the anxiety, unanswered questions, the fear of not being enough. But that's not love. This is fear disguised as love. It's the fear of losing that, which, at its core, you never truly believed you deserved it. Anxious attachment doesn't just stay in your head. It transforms into behavior. You start acting on autopilot. Try to control it. Try to predict. Try to please. Try to impress. All with a single, silent intention. If I do everything right, if I'm not mistaken, if I am enough, the other one will stay. But love doesn't work that way. Love is not a performance contract. It's not about doing everything right so you don't get abandoned. Love is a choice. It's reciprocity. It's freedom. And something painful happens in this process. While you're trying to hold someone back, the other person feels the weight of their anxiety. You can feel the pressure, even when it's not spoken. She senses the hidden need behind the care. And then he walks away. And the further the other person moves away, the more you try to get closer. More messages. More explanations. More effort. It's the perfect cycle of pain. A run. The other one is chasing. And in the end, nobody wins. They both get tired. They both get hurt. Both eventually run out. When people begin to realize they need to detach themselves to suffer less, many misunderstand this concept. They believe that detachment means ceasing to feel, shutting down emotionally, or becoming cold and indifferent. But that's not detachment. That's emotional blocking. It's an attempt to protect oneself from pain by creating distance, when in reality, what is being avoided is the very fear of getting involved. True detachment is the opposite of that. It happens when you learn to love without needing to control the other person, without living in a constant state of alert. It's about being truly present, surrendering yourself, but still being able to remain at peace if the other person chooses to leave. It's understanding that your happiness is not in anyone else's hands, and that it doesn't depend on the other person's permanence, but rather on how you relate to yourself. Letting go doesn't mean ceasing to love. It means ceasing to need. It's when love stops being about emotional survival and becomes a conscious, free, and healthy choice. Building emotional security doesn't happen overnight. It's an internal, conscious process that requires small changes in daily behavior. The first step is to stop constantly seeking approval. You don't need to be chosen to have value. As long as your self-esteem depends on the validation of others, you will live as a hostage to the fear of losing. Security begins when you learn to approve of yourself, even when no one is applauding. The second step is accepting that you don't control anyone. The other person doesn't exist to meet your expectations, nor to fill your emotional voids. The more you try to control behaviors, feelings, or decisions, the more you lose control of your own peace. When you free the other person from being who you expect them to be, you end up freeing yourself. It's also crucial to dispel the idea that love needs to be earned. You don't need to deserve love by being something you're not. Real love happens when two people show themselves completely, without masks, and still choose to stay together. Healthy relationships aren't built with excessive effort, but with authenticity. Another essential point is maintaining your identity. Many people get lost trying to mold themselves to what they believe others want. But you weren't born to fit into other people's expectations. The more true you are to yourself, the more genuine the love you offer and receive becomes. Emotional security also involves choosing connection, not control. To love is not to monitor, demand, or dominate. To love is to be present. Connection only exists when there is freedom. Whenever control appears, it is usually fear, trying to disguise itself as care. Doing what's best for you is another essential step. Self-love is the foundation of any healthy relationship. Often, it's worth honestly asking yourself, am I choosing myself, or am I abandoning myself to avoid rejection? This answer says a lot about the kind of relationship you build. Learning to be comfortable alone also completely transforms how you relate to others. When you feel comfortable in your own company, the other person ceases to be a necessity and becomes a choice. Their presence becomes a bonus, not an emotional crutch. Accepting when someone leaves is one of the hardest steps, but also one of the most liberating. Not every departure is a loss. Sometimes, it's just life making room for something more aligned with who you're becoming. Cultivating self-confidence is another pillar of emotional security. Security is not arrogance. It's knowing who you are, even when no one confirms it for you. It's being able to remain whole, even when something ends or doesn't go as expected. Finally, allow the other person to be who they are. To love is to let the other person be free, without trying to mold them to your needs or expectations. And, paradoxically, it is precisely this freedom that creates stronger, truer, and more lasting bonds. When you start practicing these steps in your daily life, something silently changes within you. It's not a noisy or immediate transformation, but it's profound. Gradually, you stop chasing after those who don't want to stay. You stop insisting where there's no reciprocity, and you stop over-explaining yourself in an attempt to be understood. You begin to say no without guilt, and to respect yourself even when it means displeasing someone. And most importantly, you begin to realize something essential. Love doesn't need fear to exist. It doesn't need anxiety, control, or constant effort to avoid ending. True love is sustained by security, not despair. In this process, you understand that you don't lose people. What you actually lose are old versions of yourself, versions that didn't know how to love themselves, that accepted emotional crumbs, and that confused intensity with connection. And when security begins to blossom within you, your relationships change completely. You start attracting people who are also ready to love in a mature, conscious, and present way, without games, without manipulation, without power struggles, just presence, reciprocity, and lightness. Relationships are not a battlefield. They are mirrors. They reveal where fear still exists, where we still don't know ourselves completely, and where there are still wounds that need healing. Each relationship shows a little of ourselves, not to punish us, but to make us more aware. The real journey isn't about finding someone who makes you feel safe. It's about becoming someone secure inside, emotionally whole, independent, and true. When security is born within you, the other person ceases to be a place of salvation and becomes a space for encounter. And when you feel complete, love changes form. It ceases to be a need. It ceases to be a lack, and becomes a celebration. Two whole individuals who choose to walk together, not out of fear of being alone, but out of a desire to share. So the invitation is simple and profound. Look within, practice healthy detachment, and build relationships where love is born, not from the fear of loss, but from the freedom to be exactly who you are. If this content made you think about your relationships, subscribe to the channel, and remember something very important. You don't need to change the other person to live in peace. You don't need to convince, insist, or mold yourself to fit someone else. True change begins when you rediscover who you are. When you stop abandoning yourself in order to be accepted, something aligns within. Peace ceases to depend on the behavior of others and begins to spring from your own emotional awareness. Because, in the end, the most secure love that exists isn't the one that comes from the outside. It's the one that begins within you.